Hi everyone, George Christie here with Wine Industry Network. Welcome to the first episode of our Bold Predictions webinar series. And this is my favorite webinar probably of the year that we do. And I think what makes it special is we have had the same panel for 4 years. We bring them back every year. We revisit their bold predictions from last year. We tap into their insights and see what they have to share with us on what they think we can expect in the year ahead. We also are lucky to have Damian Wilson back to moderate today's session. Damian's also been with us for all 4 years. He's the faculty director and Hamill Family Chair for the Sonoma State's Wine Business Institute. And I think Damian just does a terrific job leading this conversation. So thank you for being with us today. Just a reminder, we pre-record this a week or so in advance. We do that for quality purposes, but the good news is all of our speakers are going to be watching this broadcast right alongside with you. They're going to be monitoring the chat room. So as you have questions, go ahead and submit those questions. They can pick them off as they come in. Once again, thank you for joining us for the kickoff webinar of 2026. I hope you enjoyed it. I think you're going to.
Okay, thanks very much for the introduction, George. Welcome to everyone for this year's Wine Industry Network Bold Predictions for 2026. My name is Damian Wilson, and I'm the Faculty Director of Sonoma State University's Wine Business Institute. And today, we welcome back our 4 dynamic industry experts to make bold predictions about the wine business for 2026. Now, before I explain how this session is going to roll out, let me please start by introducing our guests. And firstly, following an extensive career with roles across the distribution channel, she's now a luxury fine wine importer and has been the high-profile president of Domain Estates for the last 5 years. She's such a leading driver and advocate for fine wine businesses that all we need to do is give her a platform like this one right here. Ladies and gentlemen, it's Philana Bouvier. Welcome, Philana.
Thank you so much, and welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining today.
Thanks, Philana. And next member of our panel of prediction is the public face of the industry's depletions data provider, Sipsource. He's also owner of his own consultancy and a managing director with Azure Associates. He dons more coats than a Floridian visiting Alaska in winter. It's our very own Mr. Dale Stratton. Dale?
Thank you, Damian. Great to be here. Look forward to the robust conversation once a year with this crew.
Excellent. I think we all are. And next up is our senior wine and grape analyst with Terrain, an affiliate of American Ad Credit, and the only other person on this panel using his doctorate to prescribe business success to our ailing wine sector. His PhD reveals strategic directions. It's Dr. Chris Bitter. Chris?
Thank you, Damian. I'm excited to be here and discuss everybody's predictions.
Yeah, I think there's a common theme here with these predictions. And so lastly, the one who's always famous with his own predictions. He's a research analyst for Rabobank, host of the Liquid Assets podcast, and is the only panelist who understands that something being no cap is actually a good thing. The language of the wine industry's whisperer to new consumers from millennials, Gen Zs, and alphas. Everyone, it's Mr. Bourcard Nesin.
What does no cap mean? Like literally, is it a truncation? Is it a portmanteau? Like what? Well, does anyone here know what no cap means? Could they define it for me, please?
Well, I think it's meant to be something about there's no cap on things, because if something's bad or something's rubbish, it's considered to be cap. So, yeah. Or I've been told that by members of that generation, but maybe they'll pull in my leg. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Okay, in any case, today's discussion is going to break down into 2 parts. Let me start with those. So in part 1, we start by putting our panelists under the microscope as we watch this erudite group of people being held accountable for last year's predictions. We determine just how reliable their forecasts really are. And to be honest, they did a pretty good job. So in part 2, we move from last year and on to the coming year as our panelists take turns making one bold prediction about the wine business in 2026. Each panelist will explain their prediction, and then the rest of the group take turns in debating, shooting them down, or otherwise dealing with the implications that it could have for wine business. So to kick things off, let's go over a couple of housekeeping notes before we dive into our predictions. Now, for those of you in the audience, first of all, recognize that all of these panelists are monitoring the chat. So if you have questions, please direct them to the chat box and include the @ symbol to specify the panelist to whom you're posing your question if you've got one for a specific panelist. Secondly, to the best of your ability, try to keep any questions focused on the content presented during the session. Thirdly, any post deemed to be self-promotional or unrelated to the topic or topics of discussion may be removed by chat moderators. Repeat offenders may be removed from the session. And fourthly, this session has been planned to generate discussion on topics that are likely to elicit contrasting views from both the panel members and the audience. As such, this is the opportunity to explore different considerations should the underpinning approach to your search for insights take you in this direction. So try and add to the discussion more than wanting to have the last word. Right, so let's start with last year's bold predictions. Now, we've built up the anticipation for this coming year's predictions. Let's see what our panelists writhe like when they're in front of the lens by holding them accountable for the things they said last year. And for the sake of time, we'll move quickly through these because I want to leave plenty of room for discussion on this year's predictions. Now, for those of you watching who brought questions to be answered, you may want to get started in the chat box right now. All right, so let's get started and go with the same order as last year. Starting with Dale Stratton. Last year, you predicted that there will be a significant transaction involving the top 10 wine suppliers that will materially change the structure of the current ranking and market dynamics. Do you want to tell us about that one?
Yeah, I would say that clearly we got that one right. That very soon after that, you had the transaction with the wine group purchasing the mid-tier assets of Constellation Brands, along with a handful of production facilities to go with that. That really solidifies wine group as the number 2 player in the marketplace, and dropped Constellation Brands out of the top 10 certainly from a volume standpoint. So with that, I would say that we got it right.
Yeah, you got that so right. And there was even another transaction, right? That was Chateau Saint Michel, which is a top 10 winery, but it was not a transaction between the top wineries. They sold to one of their growers essentially. That was a really interesting transaction.
And I would, the other two that I would point out, one on the supplier side, that being the Trinchero purchasing Mum Nap. I think that's a significant purchase and something that will really be interesting to watch. Then the other one that I thought was interesting last year was actually on the wholesaler side with Johnson Brothers buying Maverick, and Johnson Brothers moving into 3 new states completely with that, and really kind of bolstering their position in Florida. So good activity in that space. And again, hopefully I do as well this year.
And I don't know if I'm allowed to say it, but I think Rabobank did advise on the transactions of both Mum and Constellation Brands.
So, Bourcard, that was your first. This is your first warning on self-promoting.
My only self-promotion, I promise. The only one.
This is your first warning.
Yeah.
Damien, you got that one?
Yeah, I've noted it down. I've got black marks against anyone who comes up. So, Bourcard, it's not off to a good start. You're going to have to come up with your recovery with the prediction for this year. So
I'll be on mute.
Dale, the only thing I would say is I'm not sure how bold your prediction was, though, and perhaps you were trading on inside information there. You got it right, though.
I got it right. And I will say there actually was no inside information on it.
Yeah, let's give him credit where it's due in this one, and let's prove it otherwise. I was going to say I'll give Dale the check mark on that one. All right, so we've gone on from Dale's prediction. I'm moving on to Philana. Now, Philana, last year you predicted a seismic shift in distribution affecting smaller producers more than the larger players. How do you feel that prediction turned out?
I was absolutely correct, and it played out. And unfortunately, there are some good and bad things about it. If you think about it, the second largest distributor in the country left California. And then you saw a new emergence with a beer wholesaler becoming a player in wine and spirits. So it actually created more of a dynamic foundation and platform for distribution. But what does that mean? A lot of people say, oh, they left California because, it's too expensive. Actually, it's poorly written contracts that can bankrupt a business, where you have suppliers that are focused too much on shipments and not enough on depletions as well, which creates a lot of havoc when it comes to the distributor, and they have too much to manage. You're going to see a lot more of that this year as well, which we can just, when we discuss my prediction for 2026. But absolutely in 2025, there was 100%, even a seismic shift doesn't even cover it because it was such a huge move and such a big challenge to everyone.
Okay, so who wants to take on that, responding to Philana's prediction?
I would say the only thing that she threw in the thing about affecting small producers. It didn't just affect small producers, right? That move in California affected everybody, and really kind of studying that the fallout and where people moved on that was actually probably more interesting than the actual holdout of our NDC.
Right. And
It's,
no, go ahead. Go ahead.
no, it was my one criticism in the prep calls for these is make specific predictions. But Philana's like it wasn't the most specific prediction, but you were so gosh darn right that like there was no unequivocally correct on that. So it was prescient.
And it's not from the fact that I obviously do understand the wholesale business and we manage distribution ourselves with our business. But if you look at the field and what's happening, it wasn't just the reason why I mentioned small suppliers is, and that's going to go into what I will predict for 2026, but it's the way that you are going to have to manage your business. And when you have the second largest distributor leaving one of the biggest states in the country, especially for wine, it is going to change the way that wine is sold dramatically across the country.
Yeah, I think the only question I have is whether seismic was a big enough superlative. I mean, it was a huge change. Okay, so we've gone up and looked at the Philana's prediction, and so far we're 2 for 2. Moving on to Dr. Bitter. Chris, last year you predicted premium and luxury wine sales are going to return to the black. Off-premise sales in the $15 and over category will be higher in 2025 than 2024. How did that work out?
Well, unfortunately, it looks like I'm going to be wrong. So through the first 11 months of the year, according to Nielsen or NIQ data, sales in the $15 plus category were down by just under 1%. So that's not all that bad considered, but it certainly isn't growth. It was just slightly better than 2025. So my optimism was mainly predicated on that we would see an improvement in inflation and that we would see consumer sentiment improve in the wake of a really contentious election. And I was wrong on both of those counts. So we underestimated the potential for chaos when the new administration took office and didn't anticipate how swiftly tariffs were going to roll out. So we didn't see either of those things happen. And unfortunately, we didn't get that boost in premium luxury wine sales that I had anticipated. But all things considered, it wasn't that bad a year, at least in the off-premise channel.
I will say this, though, Chris, you were, in some cases, especially on the premium side, and we consider premium over 50. I know some companies consider premium over $15, but in my business, it's over 50. There has been some positive increases and increased market share, especially at the account level when it comes to expensive wines. There actually has been an increase and it's actually gotten better. So you need to know that in some cases, especially in some parts across the country and in the bigger cities like Miami, San Francisco, New York, there has been a surge in actually a little bit more better. People are drinking a little bit better and they're picking things that are actually more accessible but expensive, which is good. So cheers to that.
Makes me feel better.
I want to give all the credit in the world to Chris here. I think the objective of a bold prediction is that it should probably not come true that often. And I thought, I said it last year, I thought that was the boldest prediction out of the ones on the table. And it was the fact that you were even close is pretty astounding to me. So good on you.
And I would think that, because you're using syndicated data, you think about all the discounters that are in there. And when I think about the product that I saw for sale at Trader Joe's throughout the year, grocery outlet, Costco, all of those outlets that were with that, I think that you may have actually made an accurate prediction. You just didn't have the right measurement tool.
Thank you.
Okay, so to be fair to Chris on that one, he went for the long-range target and he didn't get the bullseye, but he got pretty close. So I was going to say that's a fair call. It's not certainly not a bad effort. Okay, and so moving from Chris's focus on the return to the for the premium wine sector, let's move on to Bourcard, because Bourcard, you said last year that there will be new dietary guidelines specifically that all consumers should limit alcohol consumption to 1 drink a day. How did that prediction work out?
Great. It's exactly what happened. No, it's not. So I think that the prediction was made, one, because I genuinely thought that was going to be the exact wording of the recommendations. There was a lot of fear within the industry that there would be adoption of language closer to the recommended or suggested recommendations in Canada, which was like 5 drinks a week or 3 drinks a week. It was very, very small amounts of alcohol. Turns out they just got rid of recommendations altogether and said we should just drink what you want in moderation. And I actually think that is not clear that it will have a negative or a positive impact on consumers' perception of how much to drink. I think the academic world basically says, we have no idea. Like, this doesn't really mean anything. It gets rid of any numerical kind of baseline from which consumers can guide their consumption. What I will say is I got an email from the journalist at Reuters today saying, hey, you might like this story. And it basically said, the academics and public health professionals that originally came up with recommendations were going to say 1 drink a day for men and 1 drink a day for women max. But then that was overturned by the Trump administration. And you're seeing, Mehmet Oz basically parroting industry talking points that it's a social lubricant and, people should go out and spend time with other people. I tend to believe that, but I also think it's pretty clear that there was some very effective lobbying that took place throughout this process.
So the one thing I would say, you were definitely close on that, in getting that right. And while this is a win for the industry, and I think the new guideline actually says don't drink it doesn't say drink in moderation. It says limit your alcohol consumption. But in any case, this certainly isn't an endorsement of alcohol. And I think what happened is the administration actually had bigger fish to fry. So the guidelines went from 164 pages to 10 pages, and alcohol just wasn't a focus here. So I think the industry has more work to do to make its case for unbiased treatment, because we're going to see this issue of alcohol and health continue to come up in the future.
I thought it was interesting. One paper I read that some people said they thought it would seem to be disingenuous to say it's okay to legalize cannabis, and that we want to start looking at that, but yet you can't do this over here on alcohol, and that created some conflict or some worries on them. And Bourcard, I noticed because we did have a pre-call, that you chose not to predict what the administration is going to do this year. So congratulations on that learning.
I will know. Yeah, not interested in making that prediction for many reasons.
Okay, so it's pretty clear to me that in legal terms, this was less about a win or a lose. It was more a no contest based on the changing regulations in the background. All right, so we've gone over what as a group we had as our results from last year. Let's look at our bold predictions, or move into the process for this year's predictions. So I'm going to throw over to you, Dale. Could you please tell us about your bold prediction for 2026? Why is it important to the wine industry? And then we'll open things up to the group to debate the validity and impact of your prediction. So over to you, Dale.
And I think last year I was really specific on a target, and this year, to me, it's going to be more broad. And the prediction is that this year is going to be an extremely active year, and that we're going to see really a lot of bifurcation on what happens with businesses, then on those that are successful and those that are not. There will be significant activity that will include mergers and acquisitions. It's going to include creative partnerships. It's going to be including people just choosing to wind down their businesses. And And I think it's important to note that there's probably going to be some new people come into the fold that may not have been in the beverage alcohol category before. This activity is going to be across the totality of the beverage alcohol industry. It's not just going to be something that is wine specific, beer or spirits. It's going to include all of those categories. And I think it's also going to include suppliers, wholesalers, potentially retailers, certainly parallel businesses that support the industry. And while it's difficult to get specific on that, and I await Boucard's discussion on that. I understand the lack of specificity on that, but it's just going to be an important year. And I think it's actually going to reshape the business. That 2026 is going to be a pivotal year in what the shape of the beverage alcohol industry looks like going forward.
Yes, and I'm just going to take this moment here to remind the audience, now's your chance to hit our panelists with the questions on their predictions. So before I open it up to the panel, just a reminder, put down your questions, put the @ to Dale if you want to talk to him or hit him with some queries about this prospect of mergers and acquisitions and changes that he's talking about. And now, whilst you're doing that, I'll hand over to the panel. Who's going to put Dale under the burner for his first prediction for 2026?
I actually agree. I'm not going to disagree because there's going to be, again, more changes that are going to happen. And I'll get into that when it's my turn. But, it is going to open up a great opportunity for people to emerge and you'll really see a separation between the winners and the losers. And I don't like to say the word loser, but it's really in about how to succeed in your business is really what I'm talking about, and understanding what the clear path is going to be. But there's not going to be any gray area when it comes to succeeding, and it's going to be more about focus in 2026 than anything else.
And I do think, Philana, one thing that you point out there, I think this is going to be good for the industry, right? In the end, this is going to be good for the industry. And right now, the industry is overbuilt, and that again crosses beer, wine, and spirits, right? You had, I think, the Wine Business Analytics said that there were 4% fewer operating wineries in the state of California in 2025 than there were in 2024. You hear about AB InBev shutting down 2 breweries, one of them in our neighborhood here in Fairfield, California. Jim Beam saying that they're going to stop distilling in one of their main facilities for a full year on the bourbon side. So when you start looking at that, all of that screams to being just like an overbuilt industry. So I think that it's really important to know that this is going to make the industry stronger in the end, and it's actually going to be a positive.
I agree with you there completely, Dale. It's unfortunately looks like it's going to be a case of survival of the fittest for some time now, because we just have too many wineries chasing the shrinking pool of sales. But once we get back to the right size, then we're going to see a healthier operating environment, and a more profitable wine industry is going to emerge eventually because of that. I know it's painful, but it just points out to every winery that they really need to be strategic and intentional about adapting to the evolving wine market and consumer if they want to come through on the other side. And there are plenty of opportunities out there, and lots of folks are doing well this year despite this tough environment.
I agree with Dale. The problem is I don't know what I'm agreeing with. So Dale, as one of not only my favorite people to speak with on a regular basis, but also just one of my favorite people in general, both for your analysis and your personhood, you're great. For this prediction, I would kind of want to understand a little bit more of like, what are the kind of bold things that will happen? And is it a top 10 winery is going to go out and buy a top 10 brewery or a top 10 distiller? Is it vice versa? Is it going to be a top 10 winery will be bankrupt, a top 10 distributor will go bankrupt, or importer will go bankrupt? Like, what are the bifurcations that would kind of define whether this is right or wrong. Am I in the right direction of like, is that what this means in terms of bold moves, that we're going to see more distributors exit more states, and that's going to force brands to leave those states or abandon operations, or what? That would be the only question I'd have back at you.
Yeah, and I think this one, there's going to be changes at the wholesaler level, but they're not going to be as, I don't think they're going to be as significant as a California move last year was. That was so big, but I do think that traditional people who were traditionally seen as spirits, or might be spirits and beer, people who were seen as beer company, is something's going to happen cross category. That somebody who was traditionally seen as being a supplier in this area is now going to be looking more towards a total beverage alcohol situation. Now, historically, what we would say is that the spirits company tried that with wine, right? They kind of went down that road and they all pulled back from that. So I don't think it's going to be spirits companies coming into the wine business. We saw that movie. So I think it's more likely that it's going to be a spirits company and a beer company getting more into the spirit side of things. Maybe a beer company does do some things with wine and wine related products.
They just did.
Beer is.
They just did. ABI went and bought Beatbox. Yep. And I personally, Beatbox isn't technically wine, like in the way that any consumer would understand it to be. It's party punch, but it's one of those things where, like, I was kind of disappointed that that's where it ended up, because I would have thought that would have been a great opportunity for some of the wine players to be like, well, we're not comfortable being a beer business, we're not comfortable being an RTD business, but like, this is technically wine, so maybe we can convince our board to sign off on it, or ownership to sign off on it. And they never pulled it on. I would have liked to see a different buyer of that asset in terms of, the wine industry maybe getting in on it.
The beer wholesaler is going into wine for sure. That's happening right now in the state of California. And I'll have to say, Dale, I don't think that the RNDC California is the biggest news. I think there's going to be something else that's going to fall as well. I know. I just have this feeling. So it's not going to end. That the seismic shift will continue, and in fact, it will accelerate what happens in wholesalers.
I do think, Bourcard, on your point on Beatbox, with those type of products, I don't know that the base matters. Actually, most of them have a malt, a wine, and a spirits base, so that they can better mark, depending on what market works better and what state they can do that in. In a year, what percentage of Beatbox base alcohol is wine based versus malt?
Less and less every year.
I would say that's probably the answer. Yes.
Anyone want to look at the potential positives that could come out of this, Dale? I'll give you the last word for what should we be looking for, and what can producers see as a trigger that maybe they want to step into, change out, or change up to something new in the wine industry.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that we have, and I think that this is something Philana is really going to kind of reference, really, is that part of this is about having a stronger share of mind with gatekeepers, and gatekeepers being both wholesalers and retailers. And how do I get myself a stronger share of voice as I work within that system and work within that area? So that is definitely part of the equation. And then I would also just say, growth is harder. So acquisition is a good way to bolster growth, especially when you start thinking about publicly traded companies.
Okay, so in summary for Dale's prediction, we're seeing that change is the new black, and essentially we should be looking for and be prepared to adapt to change and take advantage of opportunities in the new market. Now, on that theme, let's move over to hear what Philana has to say. Philana, tell us all about your bold prediction for 2026.
2026 is actually going to be a harder year than 2025. And it's going to be about the wholesaler and the suppliers. So my prediction is actually in two parts, because one is going to be tough to hear, and the second is going to be hopeful. What's going to be tough to hear, especially for smaller suppliers and also for more established wine and spirit suppliers, is now that distributors have been working down their inventory, they're now making real decisions about what stays in their portfolio. So if you are not able to earn your place and provide reciprocally, the dollar volume and the value that they're looking for at the distributor, they will actually eliminate and they're going to shrink their portfolio. So historically, underperforming suppliers have mostly been ignored, right? There's a lot. The wine business, experience business, especially at the wholesale level, is very relationship driven. They bring their buddies in, they want to take care of them, but at the end of the day, they don't have enough resources to really build the brands within that marketplace and within their wholesaler. So unfortunately, those relationships are going to get cut. And that's going to apply to both domestic and imported wines. No one will get a pass. What will help though, especially for the suppliers that stay and have a great strategy and work well with the distributor, is being able to have real aligned pricing, retail strategy, and understanding what by the glass pricing is. By the glass pricing, and I've said this before in previous panels, isn't optional anymore. It's going to be what makes a brand survive on a wine list. And why I say that's important is on the second part of my prediction, and it's hopeful, and this is a call to action, and this is for the larger restaurant operators, not the small guys and the Michelin star restaurants, because we know the rising costs in running a business. And we also understand also from a national account standpoint is always having to look at the markup of bottle of wine is actually more than 4 times markup on a bottle of wine in a restaurant. It is extremely expensive to drink wine in a restaurant right now. And what we need to ask, and a call to action for all restaurant operators, is to really consider to make wine not only more accessible but affordable, but taking that by the glass pricing that suppliers are giving to the distributor and passing it on to the consumer. That is going to help. That actually helps overall not only get people drinking wine and good wine, but also understanding that you can sell 2 bottles of wine versus 1 extremely expensive bottle of wine, and then you don't get that extra sale again. It actually gets people moving. We travel across the country and you see it. Restaurants are busy. People are drinking and they're out there. And if we're able to make things a little bit more affordable for people, it will help. But it's going to be an all-in, and it's going to have to help not only at the wholesale level because they're cutting back on their portfolios, and they will support the suppliers that support them. But in addition to that, to have restaurants pass on those discounts and that pricing onto the consumer.
Okay, so I'm hearing a prediction that focuses specifically on the importance of not only having relationships in theory, but relationships in practice. Otherwise, businesses are going to be losing connections with their distribution channel. So with that in mind, who wants to take the first comment in response to Philana's prediction?
Since Philana was quick to agree with me, I'm going to be quick to agree with her. There's going to be challenges that is going to continue, but we also have to remember that it starts with the consumer, which then starts kind of going into the retailer and the restaurateur. And number one, for the luxury wine category, when we think about the luxury wine category, number one, there's been a very consistent reduction in the number of white tablecloth restaurants, and that's going to continue. There's an increasing in casual dining, and so that universe of itself is shrinking on where you're going to be able to go get it and where the product is really going to shine. Within that, that operator is carrying fewer items. Points of distribution continue to decline. It was for the total, in the SIP source data, wine points of distribution were down 4.8% with our November ending data. That was on top of over 4% the year previous. So that universe of product is just going to continue to shrink. So within that, absolutely that's going to be a struggle. But the way that changes is really with at retail. The retailers are shrinking shelf space for the wine category, and that's going to continue to be a challenge.
Okay, I'm hearing Dale agreeing with Philana. It's like we're all friends now. What's going on? No, certainly I have to turn to someone for a bit of a challenge. So on that note, I can see his microphone's open. Chris, your thoughts?
Well, unfortunately, I'm going to have to agree with her as well. I'm just joking, but unfortunate. But I think she is spot on. I mean, it's really going to be tough for wineries to continue to connect in the distribution channel, and I think they really have to focus on articulating what role they can play in a distributor's portfolio and what need they can fill that isn't already being filled, because there are probably a lot of wineries that are still being carried that aren't really fulfilling a role. So the key to all of that is first, the winery has to make sure that what they're producing is demonstrating a strong value proposition to the consumer, because it all in the end comes down to whether the consumer is going to accept it and buy it or not. So I agree with Philana on this one.
Certainly, I have to go to our local contrarian for an alternative perspective. Bourcard, you must have thoughts on this.
I'm going to make a wholehearted effort to disagree, not because I want to, but because I have to, because somebody has to. So I absolutely agree on the first part of that, which is that it's going to be really tough out there. I think a lot of wineries are going to have to choose or be forced to exit certain states. And that could result in them actually solidifying their business and making some tough decisions about their portfolio and really retrenching and refocusing their resources on markets where they have a chance to win, and invest the resources that give them a chance to win. So I think you're absolutely right there. It's going to be tough, but you're going to make changes that will make your business better if you survive. On the on-premise account, I love this question because I don't understand it. Wine pricing in the on-premise, as producers and distributors aren't allowed to set the pricing there. They can advise, of course, but I've never really heard of any examples of success or people really meaningfully influencing what's happening there. And I actually think the problem and the challenge there is it's not easy to convince a restaurant to do things that are not in their economic interest. And right now, with the margins you get on spirits and the complexity of managing wine and the cost of maintaining the inventory, it's hard for them to say, like, well, sure, I want to. There's inherent value in the wine industry, but my specific business isn't going to support it because I make more money selling cocktails. I just make a Manhattan, give it a funky name, and sell it for $14. The margins are better. Consumers like it more. They don't have an anchoring price in retail that shows them that they're not getting a good deal. So my actual I want to write an article about this because I actually think it would be a better way to think about it, is actually not trying to get all accounts to change their approach to wine pricing, but to create model accounts. So like one market or one account in every market needs to just be the Brooklyn Cafe, which is a restaurant I went to in the suburbs of Atlanta, which is selling high-end wine at below retail prices in restaurants. And now, what does that mean? It means every person showing up at 2 p.m. on a I think I was there on a Wednesday, had wine on the table. They had Farniente at $50 a bottle or $56 a bottle, Chardonnay. It was incredible that the amount of volume they were putting out there. And so for me, instead of trying to convince every account, I think it would be like, we need to prop up one account that can show that, hey, not everyone's going to drink wine, but anyone who drinks wine is going to show up here. And that's going to show other accounts how we actually can make wine work and have it be a center point of a business, not all businesses.
So Bourcard, you're actually still agreeing with me because the reason why I say that,
you just said all accounts, and I mean one account.
The reason why I say that is we have to drive as an industry. I think about this group, right? It was 4 years we've been doing this together, but only once a year we get together as a group to talk. And sometimes I think in the wine business, and I'll speak for the wine business because I'm not in the spirits business, so I need to speak to what I know the best. But what I do know is making money and understanding how to run a business. And when it comes to the restaurant, and one of my best friends owns a great restaurant in Yountville, and you look at their wine list, they do a phenomenal job. Bottega restaurant, they do a phenomenal job at pricing wines at the right price. And you see every supplier in the Valley at that restaurant enjoying their bottles of wine because they're not paying 5 to 7 times markup. That's important. That's important because it brings people into the restaurant and it gets trial and it gets exploration and discovery of your wines, and also by the glass. These are things that make the wine business great. And that's what we have to do. If you're overcharging the minute you walk in the door, you're not going to get that repeat customer. It's the same with hotels, by the way. It's the exact same thing in any business.
So, two things. One, I heard somebody say, "Well, we had a couple new wine bars open up," and I'm like, "My local wine bar is more expensive than my typical restaurant. Like, it's not good pricing. So it's maybe a wine-centered space, but it's not a good value wine-centered space." So that's one, is like understanding it's not wine, it's pricing of wine, I think is really important to drive home in people's heads. But then also, and this is a question for the group, why not lead by example? Are there opportunities for wineries on their own premise to show and lead by pricing their own stuff more affordably? Or if you have a tasting room in Seattle and you're a Washington winery, why not just be the cheapest place to drink wine in your neighborhood?
I'll give everyone a chance for maybe one or two more comments, because I know that there are some mics open. But Chris, just prepping you up, you're up next after the next couple of comments.
Some of this has to start with the consumer. We as an industry, the wine industry, need to do a better job of promoting wine in general. And Philana, certainly, the more research we read and the more things that we see, affordability is one of the things that continues to rise to the top, and seems to be a barrier for a lot of people. And again, it's not that young people aren't drinking wine. It's just that they're not drinking it as much on as many occasions, and seems to be that it's moving more back towards where we were 20 years ago, where it was wine was seen as for special occasions. How do we get back to that everyday occasion, and affordability is a part of that.
Philana, last right to reply.
I think, we're all in the same boat here. We all want to succeed. And in order to succeed together is, I think having an aligned pricing strategy. And you already have suppliers. I mean, we're already lowering prices. And what we need the distributors and the restaurants to do is to align as well on that same strategy. Not you can't have everybody making 5 to 7 times markup. No one's going to be able to afford to drink at all. People are drinking. I mean, of course, there's, we can get into another topic about this, which when it comes to what's going on health-wise and Ozempic and everything else. But at the end, people still want to drink a great bottle of wine, and to make it more affordable is going to be key.
Okay, I can already see the reference from the hospitality industry, all complaining about the margins they make and how hard it is to find and train people and all of those sorts of things. So I'm just going to take the free hit before I hand it over to Chris, and just point out that that's clearly an issue for our industry. Wine is very good at adding value. We're very good at coming up with service that costs a lot of money, but the challenge that we've got in getting new consumers or getting people into the industry is that high entry point. So looking within the industry, looking at how we work on the BTG option, how we get people into wine. It could be the Brooklyn Cafe option that Bourcard mentioned. It could be some other options, but also thinking about ways that the producer can promote their brand and generate brand awareness. Because the Buy to Glass campaign, as effective as it can be to get people into the category, it also lacks a lot of visual awareness and prompting to get people and remind people for what our brands are. So I think this is an area which I'm looking forward to further discussion on, and maybe something that we'll look forward to returning to when we review this in next year's event. So on that note, I'll take my free platform and move over to ask Chris to tell us about your bold prediction for 2026.
Sure, and I'm going to try to take a little bit more optimistic view here, like I did last year, and turn to the grape side of the equation. We've been talking about wineries, but I work for a company that primarily lends to farmers, and it's a big part of our business and very important to us. So the bottom line is that in 2025, we probably crushed fewer grapes in any year since at least the early 1990s. So estimates are that we crushed between 2 and 2.5 million tons of grapes. And that was primarily because there weren't buyers for all the grapes that were grown. So there was a lack of demand. And hundreds of thousands of tons of fruit went unpicked. So my bold prediction is that we are actually going to sell more wine grapes in 2026 than we sold in 2025, and that the crush, to make Bourcard happy, I'm going to add an actual number here, that the crush will exceed 2.5 million tons, which is more than anyone is expecting we crush this year. So the main reason for this is not that I expect wine sales to improve. The main reason is that the small crush this year is going to go a long way to helping to reduce the inventory glut that we've been in. So one of the reasons why wineries didn't take as many grapes this past year is because they had a lot of excess inventory. But the small crush is going to help that. So my estimates are that we need just north of 3 million tons of grapes a year to support the current level of California wine sales. So if we only crush 2 to 2.5 million tons this past year, that's going to reduce that inventory overhang that we have. So I expect that more wineries are going to need grapes, and they're going to take more grapes in 2026 than they did in 2025. Now, this is far from an uncertainty, or from a certainty. There are a lot of wild cards here, particularly what's going to happen with the pace of wine sales. And even if wine sales don't improve, I think we could still crush more grapes. And in how large the 2025 crush actually was, and we're not going to know that till March this year. But we'll know more soon. So, to take this a little bit further than my base prediction there too, I'm going to make an even bolder prediction and say that 2025 is ultimately going to turn out to be the bottom for the grape market. And that's not just because I expect improvement on the demand side, but it's because we've made so much progress on the supply side. Now, that said, there's a lot of uncertainty there too. We really don't understand what's happening on the supply side. And it's even if we do see a bottom in terms of grape demand in 2025, I'm not expecting a fast recovery for prices. Now, that's certainly possible. It's possible that we could overcorrect on the supply side, but we just don't have enough information to know how close we are to doing that. So those are my bold projections for the year. And the last thing that I'll mention too is that I'm talking about the grape market in the aggregate. And I think, we all realize, though, that supply and demand dynamics vary widely, each specific region and appellation and in variety. So even if we are closer to balance overall, there are going to be shortages and surpluses in some areas of the market. So I'm not saying that every place is going to be better, but I do expect that in general, we're going to start to see a little bit of improvement in the grape market going forward.
So we've got two bold predictions. We've not just one. Chris has gone out on a limb twice, and he's also put he's thrown the glove down to Bourcard. So Bourcard, I'll give you the first chance, first right to reply.
Love it, Chris. Thank you so much. I next year when we have this conversation, I can look at a spreadsheet and be like, you know what, Chris, you were right or you were wrong. I appreciate that very much. There's one thing that I don't really have anything to say to that. I think you are just going to know so much more about the grape market than I do. And I'm going to lean on that knowledge to get clarity on something I think I understand, but I'm not sure if the audience will or even I do perfectly, which is when the crush report comes out, there'll be data on pricing. And that pricing will look really good and really resilient, right? The price per ton is always kind of not necessarily in line with what actually happens, and for actual growers. Could you talk a little bit about where that unharvested grapes show up in the crush report and in terms of the pricing data, and why that can skew the results in terms of what an outsider might expect the well-being of a winery to look like?
Yeah. So you're absolutely right that there are definitely some issues with the prices that come out of the grape crush report, which is why I tried to keep prices out of this, because the grape crush report prices are not a good measure of grape prices for a couple of reasons. One is they only include the fruit that was actually sold. So they don't assign a zero to those hundreds of thousands of tons that didn't sell at all, that essentially sold for zero. So that's not factored in. But then they also tend to be lagging because they are based on contract prices for fruit that's under contract. And those deals, the prices in some deals may have been negotiated many years ago, not many years ago, but 2 or 3 years ago. So they're not necessarily a good reflection of where the market is today. So for that reason, as in every year, but particularly when the market is changing as quickly as it is now, I would caution both growers and wineries to put too much weight in what the Grape Crush report says about pricing. And kind of going back to what I said, even if we see some improvement on the demand side and we keep removing grapes, I'm not sure that we're going to have a rapid rebound in prices unless we kind of overcorrect on the supply side. And that's not what I'm expecting to happen this year. And when we do have that increase in prices, it's going to take a little while for it to be reflected in the Grape Crush report because some of those deals represent past transactions.
And on that, Chris, thank you for being the bright star and going to the positive. I do think a lot of that it makes so much sense coming off of 2 really small harvests. That the third one that probably will go up makes sense. But as you well know, and maybe you can speak to the devil's in the detail on where, right? And where what zones, what areas are going to see that, what's not. Central Valley, Central Coast, North Coast, all of those. You start thinking about those, and that I think is where there's just going to be a lot of interesting things to see.
Mm-hmm. And that's an area that I simply don't have answers because we have so limited knowledge on what's been pulled, what's not being farmed, let alone what demand is for each of these price tiers. But my sense is, if I just have to make a ballpark statement, is that right now the valley is a little bit better positioned than the coast, at least in the short term. But in the long term, I expect premium luxury wine sales to hold up better. And I think ultimately the coast is going to fare better than the interior. But that's, again, based on very limited knowledge about what we have done in terms of reducing supply.
There's one question I had on the back of that, which is mothballing, a dirty word, but there's always a concern that like whatever rebound is experienced could get kind of with the fact that there's a lot of growers mothballing, production, create not enough slack in the system to prevent us going straight back into overproduction in 2027 if there's any light at the end of the tunnel.
So mothballing is certainly a wild card in this whole deal and hard to get a handle on. But you're right. Some grapes that aren't farmed this year could come back and be farmed in 2027. It remains to be seen, depending on how the grapes were mothballed, whether or not they can spring back in a year or two, how long it's going to take to get back to full productivity. But that's one of the reasons that I'm not expecting, we'll call it a V-shaped recovery here. I think it's going to be probably a long kind of drawn out bottom as we do see some of that come back into production. But at the same time, we're still seeing removals as well, which is why I just don't expect it to be getting much worse. Although the last thing I'll say, if wine sales don't turn around, we're going to have to continue to remove grapes, consistently, steadily over time if we don't see a rebound. And I think we're going to talk about wine sales next, so we'll have a little more color on that.
I think I'm going to reference the Webster's does the word of the year. And I would say the phrase from last year that was added to my vernacular was minimally farmed. That was something I'd not heard before. And all at once, everywhere I went, people were talking about minimally farming things.
Okay, and I'll give. I'm just going to prep up Bourcard. It's almost your turn to take over the microphone, but I'll give Philana the last word on Chris's prediction, because clearly, what does his prediction or how does it land for the small and premium producer out there with his prediction for 2026?
I am in agreement. Actually, I do think that there's going to be a correction. And, we're producers as well. And wineries have been, there's been smaller vintages, and then the next, it's going to be dependent. And again, it's also dependent upon Mother Nature as well. So I think, for us, we want to make sure that we stay in the game. But in order for us to stay in the game, we're, as a small luxury fine wine producer and also importer, we're aligned with, a strategic distributor, and that's going to help us get to the finish line when it comes to getting the wine out in front of consumers. And then on the estate hospitality level is obviously ensuring that we have great experiences for consumers to come and visit us. So, when it comes to I think from what Chris is saying, I'm hopeful that there will be a correction. I think it's a great, bold prediction. And also, we get back to normalizing what needs to happen for the wine business and also for our growers out there.
Okay, well, thanks for that, Philana. I think Chris's prediction of things turning around, I was going to say, that's one of the ones I'm looking forward to, particularly with the idea that we could be hitting the base of the market. And we'll certainly be able to check that in the review and preview of 2027's event. So before getting to that stage, we'll turn it over to Bourcard to hear what his bold prediction is for 2026.
So I think that the way we've covered the industry through this has been really good. Dale talking about strategy and M&A, Philana talking about distribution and retail strategy, and Chris talking about ag. I wanted to spend my time talking about the consumer. And I'm looking at the very helpful 3-tier newsletter from 3-tier beverages. And they show that total wine dollar sales for the last 52 weeks through November of 2025 was down 4.4%. My prediction is that wine sales in 2026 will fall by more or equal to 4.4%. This is not necessarily me being pessimistic. It's me, fool me once, shame on me, fool me twice, shame on me, fool me 3 times, shame on me, over and over again. There's been 3 years of us saying, it has to be the end, it has to be the bottom. And for once, I'm going to try and say no. I think a lot of wine businesses have been what gamblers would call on tilt. On tilt means you've lost some money and now you're desperate to win it back. So you start making more and more reckless bets, and eventually you lose a lot more money than you should have had you been making logical decisions. And I think the wine industry has consistently been showing themselves to be too optimistic, not making the kind of dramatic decisions that would be in line with an outlook that was more negative. It's a matter of survival, not a matter of incremental opportunity. Why do I think 2026 could be worse than 2025? Well, there's more downside risk. One is we aren't in a recession yet, and there's a good chance that the pricing that all the tariffs that was expected with tariffs from the Trump administration don't come until 2026. That's a real possibility. There's a real possibility of a recession that I've been expecting for a couple of years and hasn't come. The fact that GLP-1s are probably more accessible and more affordable in 2026, and those are a drug that have not really have that large of a user base as a share of the total population, is probably a larger share of the wine consuming population than it is for the overall country, just because the people who tend to be chubbier than they want to be and have the money to solve that problem tend to be older, wealthy people. And those older, wealthy people are the people who drink lots of wine. And so this is not to say, wine's dead. It's to say, don't plan on growth. It's hard to go to your board and say, we're not going to grow in 2026. So let's make some tough decisions and set reasonable sales goals and all of that. And I'd be interested to hear how Philana is dealing with that with her sales force. How do you set sales goals when expectations should be pretty low at this point?
Most of my salespeople will probably agree with you, but our sales goals and ambitions are extremely high. You can't run a business with no growth, but we all understand that growth is going to be even tougher in 2026. But we are expecting growth. We are driving growth. We have to. And, the piece of advice I would give to every supplier out there, and, some of it's going to be very, very difficult, is looking at other channels to sell wine and expanding your other channels and ensuring that you're focused on those things. And I will say, the wine industry is making some severe cuts. There are severe cuts that are happening across our industry, from hospitality to the distribution model, every single day. So it is definitely happening. I don't think any wine supplier out there is, I think they're realistic. And I think that they're facing some tough decisions with their businesses. And they're having to do that not only at their team level and at staffing levels, but also at pricing levels. But we have to have growth for this year. I'm going to speak just on behalf of Domain, and I think it's important for any business, especially even the larger businesses out there outside of fine wine and spirits. They all are being faced with innovation, refreshing their marketing campaigns, because they have to grow. Now, I will agree with you on one part, Bourcard, is the GLP-1. That is a real thing. That is a real thing, because people are drinking and eating a little bit less. However, again, it's going to be about the restaurant operator and also ensuring that, you bring up the point, and I want to bring this back up, one example of the Brooklyn Cafe. You get a large national account restaurant operator that is actually embracing and endorsing by the glass or affordable pricing on wine. It gets people back into the restaurants and drinking, and it actually helps businesses. Those are the things that are important. And, I think that, yes, wine sales will go down. I'd love to know, because you like to be specific, is it's going to go down a little bit more this year, but what are the price tiers that are going to be the most affected? Is it going to be between 15 and 20, 30 to 50, over 100? Because that too is also important. Premium is growing, and it's growing where I'm sitting, but I also know those grocery store $9.99 wines are also hurting. So I think it's going to be all about flexibility and also ensuring that you understand your consumer and making it easier to sell wine and easier to buy wine.
Okay, so just based on what's been said there, we've got Bourcard going in one direction and Philana going in another direction. Can they both be right? Dale, what are your thoughts on the situation?
I think Philana actually agrees with me overall. She's just saying, I'm going to white knuckle my way through this and find growth exactly. One way or another.
That's correct. Yeah. You got to hustle. You have to survive. We're never going to accept a decline. We have to have growth in our business. We have very high expectations as an organization, and we will continue to have that.
But Philana's saying I'm better than my competitors, essentially.
So Bourcard, was that dollars or volume? I assume you were looking at dollars.
Dollars. I was looking at dollars. So I said dollars.
Yeah, dollars. And I think that's one of those things that we've really seen a lot of. And actually, this year we saw trends for volume in dollars come a little bit more in line, where we had this revenue outpacing volume really strongly. It dipped. Now it's kind of balanced out. We still do see higher end wines doing well. From a price point standpoint, when I think about this, on the value side of things, there's just not that many points of distribution left to lose when you start looking at the availability. So that area is not going to lose a lot on points of distribution, because it's really already been thinned out. An area that is really overspread is, when I look at that, all I'm looking at is share of volume versus share of points of distribution. It is that kind of that $8.99 to $12.99 area that has got a bunch of red blends in it. It's got a bunch of Chardonnays. It's got all of those things. That it continues to be have a much higher share of distribution than it does of volume. So I think that you're going to see that area get hurt pretty badly. Chris's discussion about that his area, like that 15 to 20, there's a lot of things to think that are going to be positive in that area. Going to be a lot of noise between 20 and 50. 50 and above probably stabilize and will do a little bit better, is how I would look at the shape of the industry.
I like when people ask me about like public companies, and I'm not allowed to comment on it because my job doesn't allow me to. But the thing people keep asking is like, when will we know more about Diageo's future? When will we know more about beer Treasury's future? And I'm like, when sales turn positive. We have no idea what the bottom is until we aren't in it anymore. And it's just, the industry can't feel better. It can't do better. It can't plan for good and growth until we see some. And I don't think it'll be 2026. Chris, sorry, I saw you coming on, Chris. I interrupted you.
Sorry, Bourcard. Yeah, I'm just going to prepare the audience, and so those of you who are out there, you're almost out of time. We're getting near the end. I've got time for a couple more comments here. Based on Bourcard. I'm throwing down the gauntlet. But if you've got anything you wanted to ask or add to the chat box, now's your chance to do it.
Well, I was going to jump in and say, I think it might be a long time before we see actual growth in the industry overall. So I'm not agreeing with Bourcard. I think things could go either way this year. I'm not expecting much of a change for the better or the worse. I'm actually not worried about a recession, but I do think the first half of the year is going to be challenging. But I do think we could have an economic boost in the second half of the year. So we could see a little improvement there. But the problems are really more structural than economic here. And those structural drivers, and that is declining alcohol consumption. We've talked about, challenges in competition, demographics. Those structural drivers are not turning around anytime soon. So I'm not necessarily expecting to see outright growth in wine sales anytime soon. I still do believe, though, that we could see stabilization in the higher tiers in the market and premium and luxury segments. But I think waiting for growth is something that we may not be achievable for some time, and that's unfortunate. But I'm not expecting things to get much worse. I think the biggest risk this year, particularly for premium luxury wine sales, is a stock market correction, because that has really juiced wealth of more affluent consumers who buy those types of wine. And if we see a big correction there could be a little bit more hesitance to spend. So that's probably my biggest concern for the coming year.
Those new salt deductions, though, it could help.
Well, that's second half of the year. That's when I bet.
Yeah. And so I would just say, Chris, I'm so glad you mentioned structural there, just because by default, with the downturn as long as it's been, I'm not sure we can say it as anything but structural at this point, because it's 4 years arguably considered transitory. I really don't know. I think we're reaching that point where no matter what your thesis is, you can't really say this downturn is transitory because it's lasted too long. And so I think we have to look at structural issues as the driver, and therefore don't plan for a quick recovery when the economy continues to do pretty well.
Oh, I think you have to throw the COVID years out of that as well, right? It's been more than 4 years since we've seen softening of sales.
Let's look at what we've seen today with the predictions. We started out with Dale coming straight out of the blocks talking about the incredible change that's going to take place in the industry, and it's so diverse. It's really presenting the opportunity for those who are looking and preparing for change in market dynamics. We then had Philana coming in and talk about the importance of relationship development, how vital that will be, particularly for smaller producers, to work on a system that is going to work in the best interest for trying to work with the distribution channel and develop a great by the glass strategy as a means to attract and develop sales in the marketplace. We then saw Chris come out and be the first one to turn around and say things could be on the way up. We're looking at increases in volume as a prediction for next year, and also he put himself out there. He's got his neck on the block, saying that the market's going to be turning around, and we're not going to know that for at least a few years anyway. So it might not be next year we get to test him out on this, but it's going to be a great prediction to review. And then finally, Bourcard turning around and saying, "You fooled me once, you fooled me twice. It's not going to happen a third time. I'm predicting that things are going to continue in in the vein they've got, but to a greater or lesser degree. So with everyone, I'm giving everyone a chance to remind the audience how and why you're here on this panel with the last word. So Dale, tell us why you're here and what we can look forward to for next year as your last concluding remarks.
Yeah, I think when I think about what I heard here from everybody is that 2026 is again going to be a very difficult year. It's going to be a challenging year, and I do think that there's going to be things that are going to drive to that recovery, and a lot of that is going to be around people thinking creatively and thinking about how they do their business and making decisions for what their future looks like, and that's going to be a very active year. That will lead long term to a healthier, better industry, but 2026 is going to be challenging.
Philana?
I really believe this, that although, and I know 2026 will be actually more harder than 2025 because I am selling wine out there on the streets. I see and feel it every single day. And we have a sales team that works incredibly hard and is very passionate. And we're getting in front of those restaurant operators. It will be harder, but focused, disciplined brands will absolutely succeed. Do not give up. And do not give in. I think more than ever now, having a strategic distributor relationship and understanding what they need, and also being the one that is the first person to speak up and the loudest and comes in with a plan with your wholesaler and actually comes in with a team and boots on the ground is going to win. This is a time to take market share right now. There are times and opportunities where you're going to see people will fail. And there are also times and opportunities where people actually will rise. And this is the time to steal market share and to get stronger and to invest in your team.
Okay, powerful words to inspire all of us in the audience. Over to you, Chris. What are your final thoughts?
Well, I'm going to agree, unfortunately, with it's going to be another challenging year theme. And in addition to being a challenging year, there's still a lot of uncertainty out there. So that makes it tough to make decisions. And I would just give the one piece of advice that, in an uncertain environment like this, you have to focus on the things you can control and you can know. And I would suggest that those are for everyone is honing that value proposition that you're providing the consumer and really working on improving your operating efficiency. So those two things are going to benefit anyone, no matter what happens in the economy going forward.
Okay, thanks for that, Chris. And Bourcard, I'm leaving you the final word for final thoughts for Wine Industry Network's bold predictions for 2026.
Just take care of yourself. It's okay to be sad. It's okay for things to be difficult. Just make sure that you're taking care of yourself. Be safe, be kind to yourself, and have a great year. I don't have anything else to say. Just good luck out there.
Thanks very much, Bourcard, and to Dale, Chris, Philana, and certainly for everyone at the Wine Industry Network, George, for putting this on. I'm just happy to be a part of, and that concludes the bold predictions for 2026. Take care, everyone, and have a great year.
Happy New Year, everyone.
Thank you.